This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. This is the Late Late Show and my name is Catherine Taylor. Tonight my special guest is Gurdeep Singh. I'll be chatting to Gurdeep about all things CPD as we discuss his positive approach to supporting colleagues in his implementation of effective pedagogical approaches in the classroom.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Late Late Show, everyone. I'm Catherine and I'm speaking to you live from Buckinghamshire. Later on today's show, I'll be talking to Mr. Gurdeep Singh, and I'm very excited to have on the show this evening. Gurdeep is an assistant head teacher who has made it his mission to bring positivity into teaching at a time of real challenge. Tonight, we will be discussing Gurdeep's work with his learning and teaching working group this past year in his school. In which he's been using elements of researching and reading to see examples from other schools and in-school feedback and discussion to identify deliberate practice and support teacher practices and professional development in his school. Remember, if you are listening in live and would like to join us, either to post questions in the chat for Gurdeep to answer, or if you would like to call in and speak to us, then please download the Podbean app and visit ttradio.org and click Listen Live on the homepage. This will take you directly to the show. There you can post your comments and ask questions during our conversation. And once I've spoken to Gurdeep, I'll open up to any of you who want to call in. You can call in by pressing the icon at the top of the screen on your phone's app. Click this and I'll be able to connect you. And I'm hoping that Gurdeep will be joining us very, very soon. I know that he is a very, very busy man, so hopefully he'll be with us very, very shortly. It's interesting. I've been involved in a lot more sort of teacher training stuff recently, and as I've been involved in that, it really makes you think about your practice and break things down, just to make sure that they are really, really embedded. I've got some trainees at the moment, and today we've been looking at their first attempt at lesson planning, and it's just been so revelatory to me to really break things down into those constituent steps that seem so obvious and natural every time. And I think Gurdeep's hopefully just joining us now. I'm sorry I'm waffling on a little bit, but I'm just going to invite Gurdeep into the studio, and he can tell you some of his wisdom about how he works with his colleagues and trainees in his school. So hi Gurdeep, I see you're connected now. Can you hear me?
Hi Catherine, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. My apologies for being slightly late. I was trying to work out how to access the app, but I'm good. I'm a bit tired. I had open evening last night, but I'm sure I can stay up for the next hour.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you very much. And please don't worry. I know that these things, when you've not done it before, it's a bit different if you've not had this experience. So I really thank you for persevering and joining us on the air live tonight. I just wanted to invite you to set the scene for listeners, really, and let us know what a typical day or week is like for you as far as your role is concerned in your school.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been an assistant head teacher for a while, and I love the role because it's a mix of teaching, meetings, networking, and then really trying to find some time for strategic thinking. In terms of how my day and weeks are going this term, I've started a new role. I've become the head of sixth form, which is very exciting. That's after a number of years of being head of lower school, so looking after the year 7. So it's quite a big change, as I'm sure you can imagine. So my day normally starts with me walking to my office and trying to greet as many students as I can. I'm a huge advocate in terms of starting your day with positivity, saying good morning to as many different students as I can. And it's a very different vibe in the sixth form. I tend to have slightly more grown-up conversations in the sixth form than in year 7. But yeah, so that's how my day tends to start. And then, as I've said, it's a really nice mix of teaching, networking, finding time to plan ahead, meeting with colleagues. It's the role that I love. My specific role at the school, in addition to the sixth form, is I lead on learning and teaching in the school, which for me is the most important role within the school. We are also a school of character, so I lead on that as well. And learning, teaching, and character really are the same thing in many ways. And I've also taken on digital learning, which I took on about 5 years ago. So I've had a very interesting last 5 years when it comes to digital learning, as I'm sure you can imagine.
I can imagine, yeah, definitely. I'm just going to leave our listeners with some sort of things to think about in terms of what a massively diverse role you've got there. I mean, you've got all kinds of things to be doing from day to day. But before we get really into it and scratch the surface a little bit, I'm just going to put the news on for our listeners. So if you will just hold on the line there, Gertie, we'll be back with you just after these messages.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.org.uk today. ADAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
School suspensions featured in The Guardian, always a provocative topic. According to analysis reported in the newspaper, since the pandemic, disadvantaged pupils in England were 3.7 times more likely to be sent home than other pupils. The analysis was published alongside a separate survey of teachers, who said that verbal and physical abuse from pupils had increased significantly post-pandemic. School suspensions have risen overall since COVID, up 30% in 2021 to 22, compared with 2018 to 19. But have gone up more sharply amongst disadvantaged pupils, up 75% versus 4% for non-disadvantaged. The analysis was completed by Who's Losing Learning on the latest available DFE figures for 2021 to 2022. Other groups who saw significant increases were children with social workers and children with special educational needs. The analysis also looked at geographical factors. The increase in suspensions was highest in the East Midlands, up 57%, followed by the North West and North East at 34%. The survey of NASUWT members found almost 9 out of 10 said the number of pupils exhibiting physically violent and abusive behaviours has increased in the last year. Almost 3/4 of those surveyed cited poor socialisation skills following COVID restrictions as a key driving factor behind the rise in poor pupil behaviour. When asked for comment, the DFE said it supports head teachers to take the action necessary to promote good behaviour. The TES reports on further concerns around recruitment of secondary teachers in England. Figures obtained by the NEU and NAHT show ministers are on course to miss recruitment targets by 48%. Numbers in all subjects except history, PE and classics are below the national recruitment target. The figures for last month, the final month before teacher training courses begin, shows there were 13,788 recruits. This is short of the target of 26,360. Paul Whiteman, NAHT General Secretary, said the shortages meant more children were being taught either by teachers with no qualifications in the subject, by teaching assistants, or by supply staff. A DFE spokesperson said there were record numbers of teachers in schools, up by 27,000 since 2010. But unions point out that the number of pupils in state-funded schools had risen at almost double the rate of teaching workforce. Special educational needs has been in the spotlight after reports in the media suggest that the government has signed a contract targeting 20% cuts to the number of new education, health and care plans. According to The Observer, the cuts emerged as councils across England face huge financial deficits on SEND. This is caused by rising demand and long-standing underfunding, they say. Part of the government response has been the launch of the new Delivering Better Value in SEND, which supports councils to bring down budget deficits via early intervention and teaching children with SEND in mainstream schools. The plan's design cost £19.5 million, but it suggests a reduced growth in the number of EHCPs, targeting at least a 20% reduction. Concern has been expressed by SEND campaigners around the legality of such an approach. Ministers have denied that a specific target to reduce EHCP exists, and that it was completely wrong to suggest the DFE is withdrawing support for SEND. Finally, a feature article in The Guardian focuses on research into the impact of pornography on the lives of children and young people. Abby Wright spoke to 10,000 children between 2016 and 2022. They were aged between 6 and 22 and came from a range of backgrounds across the UK. Wright is a theatre designer and did the research as part of the creation of 2 new musicals. The feature article, called Too Much Too Young, is available online, but broad findings suggest that children as young as 6 are encountering porn online, often via pop-ups, but sometimes having been introduced to it by older friends or siblings. For 9 to 11-year-olds, exposure to porn is frequent via platforms like YouTube. Children as young as 12 admitted to feeling like they were addicted to pornography. Teenagers feel that they learn more from pornography than sex education classes, particularly those exploring their sexuality or gender identity. Pornography also appears to confuse the issue of consent, particularly for young women who feel if it is okay in porn, then it's okay in real life. Whatever our thoughts on such a sensitive and challenging topic, it seems clear that relationships and sex education needs to catch up quickly for a lot of young people. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. And I'm really pleased, as I've said earlier, to have Gurdeep Singh with me in the studio tonight. And Gurdeep, we've talked a little bit about your work and your context, and now I think it'd be good to dig a little deeper. And I'd like you to just articulate for our listeners what would you say makes deliberate practice an effective teaching and learning strategy, and why have you decided to have that as a focus in your working groups this year?
Yes, absolutely. So if I just go back a little bit and explore what I mean, or what we mean as schools by deliberate practice. So I'm a maths teacher and I've been teaching, 25 years, I think. And deliberate practice really is, from a school's perspective, what are the schools telling me that I should be including in my lessons, how I should be teaching my lessons, what are the key things that I should be doing. So for me, that's what deliberate practice is. And it's quite an interesting area, because we then venture towards this balance between, in a school, consistency and autonomy. So I will get onto that a little bit later on, but if I just provide a little bit of context, when we came back after the pandemic, what I really wanted to do, as somebody who led on learning and teaching in the school, is I wanted to refocus on the classroom. We'd been out of the classroom for a year or so, and then when we returned, it looked quite different, with spacing and teachers not being able to circulate so much. And I think really it was very, very important that we did have a little bit of a refocus on that. In addition to that, students hadn't really been in the classroom for such a long time. So as a school, we're a school that really gives our staff and our heads of department a fair deal of autonomy. As I explained to my staff in September when I did the inset session recently, really I see schools having three approaches. There's the must, the should, and the could. So, for example, if I came up with a list of 10 strategies, am I then saying to our staff that everybody must be doing these in their lessons? Am I saying that they should be doing these in their lessons, or am I saying that they could be doing these in their lessons? And I'll get on to some of the discussions in the working group a little bit later on, but that was one of the things that was discussed fairly regularly throughout. What sort of tone were we going to put here? As I said earlier on, we're a school that really does give our staff autonomy in many ways. The heads of subject can decide really how their staff deliver their subject, what are the key strategies for them in their lessons. So that for me sort of sets the scene as to what we meant by deliberate practice. As a school, it was something new that we were venturing into, and we felt it was about time that we did that. Our journey to where we got to towards the end of last year with regards to deliberate practice is we got feedback from our staff in terms of what was important, what they felt were important, feedback from our students. We then, as I set up my working group that had just, I think, about a dozen members, which was absolutely fantastic. And the mix of the group was really good also. I remember just over a year ago, when I spoke at the Inset Day in September 2022, I spoke about how, as a new member of staff, whether you're new to teaching or just new to the school, you must feel that you've got something to offer. I think sometimes there's a danger that new members of staff come in and feel that they can't bring any ideas from their previous schools, or trainees come in or new teachers come in and they feel they need to be inducted into how the school does things rather than coming in with their own ideas. So it was a really good mix within my working group, a mix of experiences, a mix of years within the school, a mix of staff who had pastoral responsibilities, some who had subject responsibilities. And our first real job as a working group was to take on board the feedback from staff and try and put it into some sort of organized way that we could say, well, here are all the strategies to do with, for example, relationships, behavior, delivery of subject, questioning, and so on. After that, then we looked at research. We are a school of research. We've been down this journey for 4 or 5 years. And between the group, we sort of divided up what we thought were key elements of research that were around at the time. So things that have been around for a while. So, for example, the Guy Claxton thinking, Doug Lemov, Rosenshine, which I know has been in fashion recently, looking at cognitive load, Daniel Willingham, and so on. So really, the working group, which met once a fortnight, for the first term, so from about October to the end of the first term, it was about reading, it was about research, it was about digging out the ideas that seemed to be coming up often, and combining them with the feedback from staff.
Can I just ask, because this is so interesting, I wish I could come and be in one of your working groups. This is just so interesting. When people were reading all of these bits and pieces, did you have any process of synthesizing that down? Was anybody or were people going to the books or going directly to journal articles? How did you manage that kind of the diet of what they were reading?
Yeah, that's a good question. Firstly, Catherine, you are very welcome to be in my working group. If you can make that journey over for our lunchtime meetings. So really it was me doing the management of it. So our meetings would be feeding back every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So for some staff, they were reading some of these books anyway, or had already read them. So it was really just a refresher. Others were very interested in, for example, cognitive load, and were looking at journals. So in those fortnightly meetings, we had a shared document, and I just really soaked up what people were saying and just added it to that document. Staff could add to that document throughout as well. But I think you're absolutely right. Having run working groups for a number of years, there's a danger that it can just be lots and lots of great ideas with no organisation or no necessarily an end product.
Mm.
So
Did you
yeah.
find that people engaged with the ideas critically? Did you have discussions to sort of hold them up to scrutiny at all? Or, how did you kind of manage perhaps if people read something that they disagreed with, for example?
Well, we absolutely did discuss things that people disagreed with. And I wouldn't say necessarily disagreed with, but in our context. And I think that's the key thing with research that's out there, of course, is it is very general. And you've got to think about your own school context. Now, whether that's the type of school you are or where you are on your journey. So, yeah, it was a really supportive environment, but we were there to challenge each other. Including me. I started off with an idea back in September, October of what I thought our deliberate practice would look like. And over the course of the year, it changed. So, yeah, we did challenge each other. We did discuss things that we disagreed with or we thought weren't important enough in our context. So if I give you maybe an example of that, when we were talking about retrieval and all the different ways of doing retrieval, which has actually ended up being in our deliberate practice, we visited schools where really their deliberate practice was centered very much around retrieval, because following 2 years of not being in school, there were huge gaps in knowledge. So we were there to challenge each other. We were there to discuss things that we agreed with, that we didn't necessarily agree with. And really over the course of that term, it was just, let's throw as much information out there so that from January, we can start really refining what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, and another, thing that springs to mind as well, and I can see you've got a listener tonight who probably has heard me say this before in a different context, but this idea of flexibility and fidelity. How did you kind of negotiate what, how people could adapt the strategies in their subject, for example? Did you kind of how did you kind of manage that negotiation?
Yeah, that was a really good point of discussion, particularly in that first term. If I just give you an idea of our working group, so I just threw it out there in September. So for me, I set the scene in my September inset session. I set the scene for learning and teaching in the year ahead, usually the 2 or 3 years ahead, if I'm honest. And then I say, I'd welcome people to be part of my working group. This is what we're going to look at. This is what our end product is going to be. Now, I've got a couple of members of staff who have been in my working group consistently for the last 7 or 8 years. I've got some who've come in when our focus was slightly more on character. And then I've got some who came in when we were really looking at deliberate practice. A whole range of different subjects out there. So if I give you one really specific example.
Please.
We ended up with deliberate practice across 3 areas, which is routines and expectations, feedback and assessment, and development of learners. And when we're talking about routines and expectations, we had some really good discussions around, should one of our routines be a silent task at the start of the lesson, for example? That sort of silent starter. And it was actually a couple of our languages teachers who said, well, actually, we don't necessarily want to have a silent task at the start of a lesson. Other teachers, so for example, as I said, I'm maths, other teachers were talking about, well, I want it to be more discussion at the start or collaborative learning. Others did say, yeah, actually a silent task at the start of the lesson. So the flexibility comes through our language, really. And it wasn't a silent task at the start of the lesson, it was a calm, focused task at the start of the lesson. So that calm, focused task could be discussion, it
Yeah.
could be working collaboratively, it could be a sort of a group discussion, it could be a teacher Q&A, but as long as from the teacher's perspective, it was a calm and focused task. So absolutely, with autonomy and trust in teachers,
Mm.
there does need to be flexibility. As I said from the start, we are a should school rather than a must school. And I think within the should does allow for flexibility.
I think that's really important, and I really like the way that you've kind of clearly thought very carefully about the language. And I think a calm focus, as opposed to silent, it really does allow for teachers to turn the task to their group. It's interesting. I said right at the start of the show, I've been looking at lesson planning with some brand new trainees today, and
Yeah.
thinking about starters, the first starter they've ever planned ever, and should we do the retrieval practice, should we do this, should we do that, and just the discussion around what a starter might look like. And it was quite a revelatory one, because you see it with fresh eyes when you have to discuss it like that. So I find that really interesting how you've kind of gone about that. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about kind of the evolution of the group, and how long, and like your sort of the goals that you set along the way to achieving your outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, deliberate practice was a 2-year piece of work. Last year was year 1, and we just started year 2. So for me, it was a 2-year piece of work. But as I mentioned earlier on, being absolutely honest, I've ran working groups that have been lovely, and we've had lovely discussions every few weeks. But in terms of end product and impact across the school, it hasn't had the impact that I would have liked it to. I've had working groups where it's been driven by me. So I was really keen that there was very clear objectives. So end of the first term, reading and research and feedback is all completed. Term 2 then was when we were going to start having discussions about what we felt was important. But at the same time, I was keen to get out and see other schools. So the reading and research is fantastic, but we also are outward looking, and we accept that some schools are much further down this journey than we are. In fact, the idea of deliberate practice came the year before. I was visiting a school as part of my work with regards to character, and I was on an assessment for the character quality mark from ACE, which is the Association for Character Education, and I just saw an example of deliberate practice in classrooms. It was quite different to what we ended up with, but that's for me where firstly it got me thinking about, we really need to be doing something like this. It would benefit us to have something like this. So term 2 was going out to see other schools, but also just getting examples from other schools. So not necessarily a visit, but just emailing and saying, have you got something that defines your approach to learning and teaching in the classroom? And if so, can I just have it? So we had a range of different examples, and they, combined with the reading and research, it was them that really led us down the route of starting to form much clearer ideas as to what we were going to end up like. In my sort of mathematical thinking, and I always hold my hands up to this, I started the year thinking, right, I want 5 strategies, and that's what we're going to be doing. And the whole school is going to be behind these 5 strategies. And actually, we ended up with 3 areas, as I mentioned earlier on: routines, expectations, feedback and assessment, and development of learners. So for me, there was always very clear targets. So at the end of term 2 is where we would have probably 75% decided what we were going to do, so that when I had a session with staff, I had a CPD session with staff, I could feed back to them. I was very keen to report back to staff throughout the year so they knew exactly what was going on. Because I think when I first introduced it, there were a few staff who were thinking, well, we've never really done this before. We've never really, had an assistant head saying, right, in your lessons, you should be doing this. And I know that sounds really strange. We do have our approach to learning and teaching. We're a school of character. So numerous times I've stood in front of staff and said, your main role is to develop the students in front of you. You do that through your subject delivery, as opposed to your subject delivery is the only thing that you do. So I was very keen to be informing staff, and then I was then feeding back to governors in the summer term. And I think this sort of timeline, which I set out at the start of the year, enabled us to, one, make the progress that I wanted, two, to keep things focused, because we can have lots and lots of ideas, and there's lots of overlap with deliberate practice. We had a session where we came up with 50 ideas.
Wow.
Well, because there's so many things that were important in the classroom, and we had to prioritize. I think the funniest working group session, and if anybody's listening from in my working group, you might remember this. We had a working group session, and I think this was in March, April, and I had to go to a meeting. So I started the session, and I said, by the time I come back in half an hour, I want you to have clearly identified 3 things that we're going to include. Mm-hmm. Knowing what a challenge that would be, I put somebody in charge, and when I came back, they hadn't identified 3 things, and I think we'd actually expanded the list. So that sort of gives you an idea of what can happen if you haven't got those, really clear points where you want to achieve something. There is flexibility in that, and the reading and research probably ran a little bit longer, but I felt that was really, really important. So I said it's part of a 2-year project. So at the end of year 1, we identified what the elements of deliberate practice are. I've presented that to staff in September, but of course, just because I've had an hour session with staff presenting back, that in no way means that I'm going to be seeing that in the classroom now.
Yeah.
So year 2.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I think this is, that's the sticky bit, isn't it? Where you've got to kind of see that uptake, because I imagine that the people that came to the working group were sort of self-selecting and motivated for their own personal interest and had the capacity and so forth. And, you and I both know that there can be teachers out there who feel perfectly fine, thank you very much, and do not necessarily want to change things. And sort of worse than that, I think there can be teachers who have grown to mistrust through their previous experiences and actually see this kind of intervention as really quite unsettling and threatening, even though it comes with the best of intentions. So I wonder how do you anticipate that rollout? What kind of challenges do you think you're going to?
So this is a question I've been asked several times when I've been visited by senior leaders from other schools. How do you deal with those staff who maybe don't take what you want on board? I always start by empathizing as much as I possibly can. I don't believe, and this is my starting point, I don't believe there's any member of staff in our school, in the large majority of schools, who doesn't care. I don't believe there's any member of staff who is not interested in doing the best for their students. Yeah. And that's my sort of starting point. So then I start thinking about, why is there resistance? So year 2 for me is about embedding. And what that's going to look like is my working group will continue. But now that we've established deliberate practice, our focus is going to be, well, how can we get it out there? How can we share strategies? So, for example, when we're talking about hands-down questioning, commonly known as cold calling, but I call it hands-down questioning, how can we put out some examples there that staff can go, oh, that's quite easy to do? So for us, it's about, does it make sense? Can you easily put it into your practice? And then this is going to be a weekly message from me. So in our staff briefings, every week, I'm going to be getting up and saying, just a reminder of deliberate practice. One of the things that we spoke about was, this is what it looks like. Maybe for this week, just try and think and focus. And are you doing that? or try to do something along it. So it's going to be a constant message throughout the year. And what I've learned over the years is to really just keep on going and keep on going and keep on going. And then those members of staff or those voices really do reduce, and you gain their trust that actually you're not doing something that in 2 years' time you're going to say, well, actually, we told you to do that 2 years ago. Well, we're changing it now.
Yeah.
And I commonly say, and I did this with deliberate practice in September when I shared our strategies, I said, this is just good teaching. And as teachers, it's a really hectic job, and sometimes we fall into bad habits. And a little bit later on, I might talk to you about some videos that I've made linked around bad habits, but we fall into bad habits. And we forget sometimes when we're in the classroom what good teaching actually is. So the idea of deliberate practice is it's alerting us fairly constantly throughout the year to the things that we believe are important in our school and what good teaching looks like in our school.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I read a paper a little while ago, which was, I think, New Zealand or Australia. Anyway, they tried to put some mathematical reform into this school, and all the teachers had kind of gone along with it except for one. And what they found that she was doing was that she was trying to do all of the new things, but also she kind of wanted to carry on with some of her old practices as well, because she just kind of didn't trust the new ones. And so she ended up like not duplicating her work, but she was tying herself in knots over it. And they finally kind of unpicked why she was so stressed and what was going on. Do you ever find that there are teachers that try to implement things in a really kind of in not a very wise way, shall we say, so that there ends up being, it's not really coherent, and there might be they're shoehorning practices in at the same time as just trying to carry on as they've always carried on? Is that something that you've ever come across?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I quite like the simplicity of our model of deliberate practice. I think sometimes as teachers, I'm going to give you a golf analogy, if that's okay.
I go for it.
So I've got back into golf playing with my son, who's 16. And I remember when I started playing golf, I hadn't had lessons, and I'd usually go around with people who are really quite experienced. And normally my shots would be sliced. I'm a left-hander, so they'd slice off to the left. And people who I'd be playing with would start talking to me and saying things like, you need to keep your head down, your grip, your wrist, your feet are not right, you need to follow through, and so on. And I was trying to do everything.
Yeah.
And by trying to do everything, I wasn't actually achieving anything. And if anything, it was getting worse. So yes, there are staff, and I think it's the trying to do everything.
Yeah.
As opposed to, let's just start with one idea, with one strategy. So the simplicity of deliberate practice is we can just say, focus on this. Focus on retrieval in your lessons. Focus on challenging your students beyond the curriculum. Just focus on one thing. What is it that's going to make the biggest difference to you? Now, obviously, what's important here is line management, the culture of the school, the openness of the school. We constantly say to our students, try things, and it's okay if you get things wrong. You reflect and you improve. And I think that's a really important message in teaching as well, actually, but not trying to do too much all at the same time.
That's so important. And I'm just interested, and I know that we kind of had a bit of an idea of the way our conversation was going to go, and we're going to talk about your positivity and that kind of side of things in a minute. But I just wonder, the teachers who perhaps aren't going to implement everything at once, how does it work in kind of helping them to define or choose the area that they're going to, that first, as Paul, who's just put on the chat, says, one brick at a time. Who helps decide what the first brick is?
So it really depends on where their support is coming from. So if we're talking about trainees and ECTs, who probably have the biggest learning curve. Obviously, they've got support. If it's teachers who are supported, so experienced teachers, but there are things that are challenging. So it might be there's a particularly challenging class and they're working either with their head of department or they're working with the head of year, for example. That part of that discussion, within our school, it is you cannot do everything. Number one, what is going to make is it a behavior thing? Is it challenging the students? Is it consistency? Is it where you're pitching work at? Is it the clarity of your teaching? Is it to do with planning? So it's not an easy question to answer, other than to say it's done at an individual level, and it has to be done at an individual level. We've got appraisal systems. We buddy up staff. We have learning walks, so somebody can go into someone else's class, and it's not a judgmental thing.
It's quite just routine, and people. People
we have had staff
it.
being videoed before. And watch back, obviously, if they're comfortable with doing that. So I think there's a range of different things, but for me, it goes back to, like many of these things do, what's the culture within the school? How do you treat your staff? Do you trust your staff? And then is it okay to make mistakes, get things wrong, but is there support in place over a period of time? Because things don't usually just improve like that.
Yeah, it's tending the garden, isn't it? If that works as an analogy. Gurdeep, thank you so much. That's been so interesting to hear about that process, and I know we could talk a lot more about it. But what I'm going to do just now is I'm just going to play our messages again, and after that, if we could talk a little bit about your whole outlook, because I think that's really fascinating, and I know that a lot of people out there in Xland sort of take a lot of inspiration from you as well. So let's have a couple of messages and then we'll talk about that, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.org.uk today. ADAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
Okay, just coming back there. I just, before I bring Gurdeep back in, and maybe Gurdeep, you've got something you might want to comment. I've just seen Paul has put a comment in the chat from a desperately struggling ECT who's, clearly got a very challenging situation. Paul, I'm really sorry to hear about that. We'll perhaps pick up on that comment a little bit later. Gurdeep, I just wonder what you would advise somebody who you've got obviously a philosophy of positivity. How do you approach someone who's feeling in such a desperate situation that perhaps they're struggling with their positivity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've just read that comment, and it took me back to my first year in teaching, and then my first year when I moved schools for the first time. So I absolutely get that. Reading that, my first thing that I thought was there has to be support within the school. So no one can just be allowed to have classes like that without an element of support. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing, from a sort of a pedagogy point of view, that's worked for me is to simplify everything. I think, there can be mixed messages, particularly when we start teaching. If you've got a class that you're really struggling with, plan fun activities. I'm not sure that's the best thing to do all the time. think about your lesson plan, think about the seating. Absolutely, and all those things are important. But I think Paul put the comment, which is one brick at a time. Simplify everything down. Try and achieve productive 10 minutes at the start of the lesson. What needs to happen for you to do that? But if you need to seek support, then do seek support. Coming back to the positivity side, positivity doesn't get you through everything, but in my opinion, it really does help. And honesty and openness. Teaching really is difficult. And in my experience working with new teachers and trainees, and I've thought this increasingly over the last 10 years, sometimes we place them with the expert teachers within our schools, which I absolutely get why. They're going to pick up lots and lots of useful practice. But what must it be like to be somebody who is at the start of your journey, is quite nervous, quite anxious, and then you see teachers who just walk into a classroom, don't have to raise their voice, the class immediately go quiet, and it's almost like it's magic, and you don't see the journey that's taken somebody to get there.
Yeah.
So I think openness, in terms of, are there other teachers around the school who are struggling? Let's have that conversation, because that does improve, I think, the positivity and the confidence, because it's not just you. As we know, the classroom can be a very lonely place. It's you against 33 students, and sometimes it feels like you're the only one who's struggling. You feel like it's personal. I think those healthy conversations about you're not the only one who's struggling, it's not personal. What can we do? What can we do in the short term? What's the one thing that can make the biggest difference? Whether, as I say, it's the start of a lesson, the middle of a lesson, simplify teaching down. Teaching can be, I don't mean easy, but teaching can be very simple in the sense of you're there to tell the students to do something. I'm not saying it's easy, but if we just simplify it to that, what needs to happen for them to listen to you and then for them to do it? Except it's going to take time. It does take time. But where I think positivity comes in, it just gives you a little bit of a shield at the end of the day. And it's not easy. I've been there myself. And with some classes, it took me a year to get to anywhere nearer where I wanted them. But throughout that year, it actually really helped my practice longer term.
Yeah, that's something that I think a lot about. I think it's wonderful to have the trainees and the ECTs that we have, and you and I both work in very similar contexts, I think. But I worked for the first 10 years, first eight or so years of my career in a very different context. And I do think there's an argument for cutting your teeth in a way. I was lucky, I was very supported in that context. And I know I've spoken to teachers who've had terrible inductions into the profession and still feel the kind of the ripples of that now. But, you do... you definitely need the opportunity to hone your pedagogical skills, but if you don't have the opportunity to also hone your behaviour management skills, then you are going to come unstuck, because you kind of need both sets of skills, don't you?
Yeah, and sometimes we can be a little bit too ambitious at the start of our careers. We can aim for the pedagogy, we can aim for the differentiation, we can aim for maximum engagement. But I think you're absolutely right. It starts with behaviour, because if you cannot get a class to behave, then you can't really do much else from that. And I think that's really important. I've just read the message, and yeah, Paul, fingers crossed. If there's 3 ECTs, I wonder whether that is a supportive network that they're discussing between themselves. I remember when I started, there was, I think, 5 of us, and we would have those conversations, often on a Friday with a drink. We would have those, and they did really help, because it puts things in context.
it's very, I think you're very, very right to say that it can be a lonely profession. It's one of those things, we talk to people all day, but often can go quite a long time without talking to another adult, which, you can, especially when you care so much and perhaps it's been a long-term dream of becoming a teacher, then you come and you find it's actually quite tough. I can remember I had a class. It was one of those classes where they go off to do bricklaying 2 days a week in college, and then they came back in to do English, maths, and RE. And I got them on a Thursday afternoon for RE. And did they want to do it? No, they did not. And it was. I think there was only about 8 of them, and it was all we could do to, watch a documentary about some cultural place in the world and then discuss it. And it's really easy to feel that you're kind of not cut out for it, but you do find strategies that work for those young people at that time, and then different classes, you find other strategies. But I do have some concerns when ECTs and ITTs don't get the balance between those two kind of prongs of our kind of professional lives. Sorry, I've started telling my own anecdotes, and it's your show, Go Deep. Tell me a bit about kind of your, how you work on a day-to-day basis and through your planning to really encourage staff to embrace that positivity, and students as well, I guess. Does that rub off to them?
Yeah, well, I hope so. None of them have ever complained. Not that I'm sure that they would. I think it's just our language at all times. When I'm, as I said at the start, when I'm walking from my car to my office, and the students know me. I've been at school a while.
I think everyone on the internet knows you.
Yes, I'm not going to call it X though. I'll call it Twitter.
Quite right.
Students now will say good morning to me before I say good morning to them. We'll smile, a simple exchange, and that's all that it needs to be. Taking time out of my day, and I get that I've got the luxury of having a bit more time when I'm not in the classroom to just have informal conversations with staff. Smiles, positivity, positive feedback, thanking people. One of the aspects of deliberate practice that, I wouldn't say entirely came from me, was a positive greeting at the end of every lesson. So when I think back to the challenging classes, as I was saying, there was no positivity in there at all. It was really clear that I struggled with them. I didn't really enjoy the lessons. But actually, with one of the classes a few years later on, I'd thank them at the end of the lesson. I'd say, we did actually achieve some things. We did do that well. We had a really good period of time. So thank you. It's easy to focus on the negatives and the challenges, but for me, it's about your language and being as positive as you can. Because, as teachers, do we really empathize with students enough? In the secondary school, they'll have 5 different lessons. They're walking around, they might be tired. And depending on the nature of the lessons, as you said, they might not want to do some of them. But I think being positive, congratulating them, it doesn't have to be just at the end of a lesson, but, throughout. For me, that makes a difference. And I hope that it does rub off on other people. It rubs off on students, and it rubs off on staff. I have lots of positive conversations.
You can feel just, there's a general vibe. I mean, people seem to respond so well, to your posts on Twitter, and clearly there's a lot of people who just enjoy that little bit of positivity every day. We've got a few minutes left, and I do want to invite anyone who's listening who'd like to phone in. If you'd like to, we've got about 5 minutes, so I do apologise for cutting it short, but please do phone in if you want to ask Gurdeep a question. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. And, Gurdeep, while we wait to see if anybody does want to phone in, I wonder if you could, if I could have your big ideas on education in general. What would you like to see happen or change?
My big ideas.
Yes.
Well, I'm really interested in the way that teacher training is going. It's very different from my time when I started teaching. I did a PGCE. I wasn't really in the classroom until October. I was really shielded from what teaching actually was. So I think the new model of your trainees starting with you on the September inset day, I think is so much better.
Yeah.
I think the 2-year model for ECT, I get the advantages of it. Part of me does worry: are we putting an additional burden on new teachers from a sort of a paperwork jumping through the hoops point of view, at that early point in their career? Does the system trust schools enough to say, well, actually, that person's working here, we're the ones who are training them, so maybe we should decide what hoops, if you want to put it that way, they should be jumping through?
Yeah, I wonder if sorry to interrupt, but I wonder if Paul, who's just asked if he can join the conversation, if you might want to, because I know he's clearly brought up ECTs today as well. So I'm just going to bring Paul in, if he's still there. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
How are you? Thanks for calling in tonight. Paul, Gurdeep, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Paul, did you want to just share your thoughts on the issues that we've just been discussing this evening?
Yeah. My friend's got a meeting with the head teacher tomorrow. I just thought 3 ECTs having the same mentor is just a little bit overloaded, really. So maybe a situation over there where she's just lacking a little bit of support. She doesn't currently have a TA in that situation either. And I remember me and Catherine, we were speaking, weren't we, before school started again, because I was feeling the same way, because I've got a class similar to my friend, to be fair, same number, similar sort of number of children on EHCPs, all that sort of
You're
stuff.
primary, aren't you, Paul?
Yeah. And I've been really lucky, actually. I'm still not, fully convinced about this year, like I was sort of saying before, or at the start of September. But thankfully for me, in some ways, we're a small school, and the head teacher, who's only been head teacher there for 2 years now, she was acting, and she was deputy head before that. She was year 6 teacher as well. So the way that she looks after us is because she was us, if you like. It's not like she's come from a different school to the one that we're at now. She actually has seen other head teachers be there, and she's seen lots of different ways of working, and then she's picked out maybe the best ones that she knows works, because that's obviously what she's been doing. But she talks to us all the time. It's more of a team than a dictatorship, if you like, which is massive. It's huge. But I can imagine in a school where it's maybe larger and there's less support and maybe less time to sort of speak to your mentor or your head teacher or whatever, then that could be really difficult, especially for an ECT.
So Paul, do you think that we have swung, as Gurdeep suggested, we've swung so far away from shielding early career teachers and trainees to kind of just throwing them in to sink or swim? Do you think this pendulum swung too far?
In some ways, yeah, because I think the way I've sort of found it is that, oh, well, if they're good enough, they'll survive. That kind of thing. And, oh, if they don't make it, they're a bit soft. And that actually, you're doing people a disservice, because we could have so many more inspirational and bright teachers if they just got a little bit of a foot up, a little bit of support just at the right times. It shouldn't be like you have to go through. It shouldn't have to go. You go through like Army SEAL training to show that you're worthy of being a teacher.
No, thank
And I
you,
think
Paul.
sometimes it seems to be like that. So
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We are pretty much out of time. I'm just gonna say goodbye to you, Paul. Thank you very much for calling in again tonight.
no
I'm
problem.
gonna give the last word to Gurdeep this evening before I play our final messages. Gurdeep, what do you? How do you respond to Paul's kind of comments there?
Yeah, I think one of my main things, and it is different being in a small primary to a secondary, is there should be more support than just the mentor. And sometimes I think there's a feeling that everything needs to come from the mentor. I absolutely agree with just a foot up, and I don't like this idea of sink or swim. You've now qualified, right? Here you go. Here's a class. You're going to struggle with them. Well, that's just natural. Hopefully you'll make it out of the 2 years. I do really wonder if some of the approach of the ECT framework can move away from actually additional paperwork, additional burden, to more real support and more honesty, and simplifying teaching down into what it needs to be at the very start.
Yeah, no, and it comes back to what we've been talking about this evening, which is, don't try and do it all at once. Pick something, work on that, get competent, get confident as well with that, and then add the next thing. I think we do kind of expect the finished article, and I think people put pressure on themselves as well, perhaps by, seeing those expert teachers and then feeling inadequate, when actually it's like anything, it takes time to build it up, doesn't it? Brilliant. Thank you, Gurdeep. We are out of time. I really appreciate your call tonight, and I know that a lot of people will download this after the fact and listen again. So thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight, and I'll see you soon.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Take care. This is the end of the show. It brings us to the end of the late show tonight. Many thanks to today's special guest, Gurdeep Singh, and to all of you who have joined us live, and to everyone who's listening on the podcast. Please remember there are Teachers Talk radio shows all week, and many more to download on the Podbean app. Join me again fortnightly at the same time for more Teachers Talk Radio. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.